What's up, everybody? We're here with another episode of the Mauisnake Show, and I am joined today by Scoopster. This is a guy whose work I have really been liking at Dust2 US, but he has also contributed to the Counter-Strike community in a multitude of ways. On top of that, he is studying statistics at UCLA at present. He just took a couple of midterms yesterday, so I'm very thankful that he was able to still make time in his busy student schedule to make it on. But Scoopster, I know you had another role recently for Blast. Actually, could you tell me what that was?
Yeah, sure. So at the Blast TV Paris Major, I was lucky enough to work on that. And basically, what I did is my role was called graphics editorial. And what that meant is um, talent said what they wanted to talk about on the show a bit before it. And then I found the stats to back up their points and passed that on over to the broadcast crew for them to make the preset graphics.
Okay, cool. So I was probably actually contacting you through other channels when I said I need a graphic to show that Cadian is not the main character.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for joining again. And yeah, you can see a lot of Scoopster's work on one, his Twitter, which I will link in the description below. And I will be talking about a couple of his articles. But there is pressing news hot off the presses. This just released right before we recorded this podcast that Cloud9 has officially announced that Boomich will be joining their roster. So, first takes on this, Scoopster.
So first takes, I think Cloud9 are really going for the five rifler meta, which I think is a bit strange. I'm not the biggest fan of that setup, but I do initially like Boomish joining the team. He's a proven IGL at the top level and, trained by Blade, and I think that he can bring what this Cloud9 roster needs to finally break out of their lurch, break out, jump that hurdle.
Yeah, this is actually the move that I wanted for Nafany over a year ago, where I was saying that they need to get a proven in-game leader, and Boomich was my number one candidate. And with the musical chairs that have been played with Cloud9 lately, given that, yeah, it was Nafany, of course, then it was Electronic, then Hobbit took over the duties for a while. Now they have a guy who really is born and bred to be an in-game leader. He is a major winning in-game leader, and I would say that when people are looking at some of the possible roster moves for teams, like even let's just throw out Heroic's name, for example, people are saying, oh, if you're getting rid of Cadian, why not bring in Glaive? Well, Glaive didn't even look that good on Astralis the last time he was playing, but Boomich has actually been competing. He's been playing with one win for a while. They just won a CCT online, and I know a lot of people are going to scoff at that. They're going to say, it's just online CS. Why does it matter? Okay, winning those is pretty hard. Like actually making it through those, it shows that you're doing something right.
Yeah, they're definitely not meaningless cups. I mean, Monty had to win how many of them before they actually made a break onto the world stage? And then, now they've lost their best player and they're still consistently like trying, like, they're near lower echelon of that top 10, but they're still in it. And, they're fighting pretty well against these other top teams.
Yeah, I would think that most people would consider at this point Monty to be a pretty stable force in the top 10, even though you're not really going to expect them to win tournaments. But we saw that the run that they had at ESL Pro League, we see that they're now actually, in some ways, a mainstay for tier one tournaments. They're just getting the invites at this point because they've accumulated enough ranking points. But yeah, I overall with this Cloud9 move, I think that this is exactly this is what they needed to do. I just think it comes a little bit late. That's my one concern with it, and I do think that losing out on Shiro, like you mentioned, the fact that they're moving to the five rifler meta of CS2 and what we're getting there. Do you want to elaborate on that, because I think we both have some thoughts on the fact that the op is not as prevalent here now in CS2.
Yeah, so what we have seen out of C9 is they've only played I think 6 maps together with this 5 so far.
Hmm.
Um, but I do want to say that it's been perfecto on the op when they do choose to pull it out, which he had some nice rounds like on an ancient game if I recall correctly, but overall it's not what you want to see from an opper in general. Obviously they're going to fix that as Boomich does become full-time in-game leader and they do get a system put in place. But perfecto on the op, if they do choose to, put him on that full time, is really, I think, a misstep because this is a guy, who is I believe he got the award for uh, Anchor of the Year, and he's consistently one of the highest performing players in these, shit roles, to be honest. Like he's constantly playing by himself and he's getting his one and falling back or getting two and three and traded. And losing that, I think, is not really worth it. And I'm not saying it's because opping is easy and you can get any opper to fill in the spot, but it's very hard to replace an anchor who is so good in their role.
I agree with you there. That's because Perfecto was so masterful when he needed to just deploy one piece of utility at the perfect time to enable his team at the time, Navi, when I'm thinking about this mostly, to do something active on the other side of the map. It was like they could basically sacrifice Perfecto knowing that we don't need to give this guy any resources. He's so self sufficient. And in a weird way, if you had to give this op to anybody on the team, I unfortunately I don't really know who I would give it to. I
Yeah,
almost would maybe even consider someone like Axile, who I know is
that's what I was
very
gonna say.
yeah, he's very skilled, but he's kind of been falling off on his position. Whereas Perfecto is still so good at anchoring, and the thing is that Axile is probably to me in a weird way. If I look at this team right now, he's probably the weak link. I hate to say that because a year ago he was a top 5 player, but as it stands, I think everybody else in their role has been delivering in some sense. Electronic has looked actually a little bit better as an individual since Hobbit took over the in-game leading. I would say that uh, Hobbit himself actually, now that he was kind of bad when Electronic was in-game leading over him, and Hobbit had kind of fallen off actually towards the tail end of when Nafany was calling for the team. But I feel like there's a slight resurgence in Hobbit right now too. And in terms of just expectation to delivery and performance and output, I'd say that Axel right now probably needs the biggest shakeup for himself. Maybe that'll come in the form of Boomich being a more solid in-game leader that's going to provide some kind of system that'll enable Axile. But I wouldn't have minded them just saying, here, Perfecto, take the roles of Axile. Axile try opping for a little bit here, and Boomich just play all the old roles Nafany had because they kind of had similar aggressive tendencies.
Mhm. I think something that's very important is that Axile is used to being set up. He had those aggressive, like strong CT positions. He gets flashed for. He gets teammates to smoke when he's to smoke himself off when he's mollied. And Perfecto is just used to playing alone. He has to throw the molly to stop the rush. He has to, stand his ground. And I'm not too sure if he's used to, calling for flashes, saying, "Hey," to taking the initiative himself, because that's what we see. That we see the best operas in the world. They're incredibly good at just taking plays themselves and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go run down mid. I'm gonna go into underpass on Mirage. I'm gonna post up. You have to connect. You have to hold me from connector and trust me to get a kill here." And I don't know if Perfecto has that dog in him to yell to his yeah, to
Yeah.
yell to the other C9 members like, "Hey, I'm gonna run into A ramp and hold a deep line. You guys have to fill in the holes around me."
Right, right. Okay. We're already focusing on one NA organization. Obviously, they're playing with Russian players now, but I want to get to the one that if people are tuning in because they see you're a Dust 2 US writer, you cover a lot of North American Counter-Strike. You wrote an article recently about Liquid's proposed new roster, and you had a great article on Dust 2 US, which I'll also link below, where people could see role for role with the lineup, including Naf, Yukindar, Cadian,
Skulls.
Skulls,
Yeah.
and why am I missing
Twist.
one? And Twists. How the role overlap is kind of decent, but I want to know from your perspective, since you're the one that put this all
Mhm.
together. What's your take on it in terms of? Let's just start with roles first. Do you think the roles are solid if this is the new lineup for Liquid?
Yeah, so I touched on this in the article. So by getting rid of Rainmaker and Patsy, you're cutting one incredibly passive and one incredibly active player. Skulls and Twists themselves are fairly passive players. Skulls more so. So with this, you're trading an aggressive and a passive for two pretty passive players, meaning the holes that open up in the lineup in the roles are the more aggressive ones. So to put an example, Patsy was the solo A bathrooms player. on Overpass on CT side.
Hmm.
Um, this is like by rating the strongest role in the game because there's so many angles you can fall back to. There's so many strong positions to hold that you see teams put their best players there all the time, like the strongest rifling players there. And Patsy held that. Now he's gone. So most likely it makes sense for Yakinder to take this role.
Yeah,
But then
agreed.
the other active-ish player, or yeah, player on the Overpass. Overpass is a bit weird because you have one incredibly active player and three less so. But the B rotate. Um, you don't really have anyone to fit that spot
Mm.
yet. That's what Yekinder was. Now he's gone. So you'd probably see someone like Twists take that more active role, and and we'll see more of that throughout the other maps where Twists, Skulls, and NAF, but mostly I think it's going to be Twists. That's what makes the most sense in my mind. Are going to take more active positions on CT side, and that's going to unlock a lot of his potential that I wouldn't say had been locked away on FaZe, but was, kind of reeled back for other players to take the limelight.
Ooh, actually, I feel like it could be NAF because I mean, I was looking at your chart there for actually who would play what position, and I feel like you put down that NAF and Skulls were both B monster players, and Twist was B short for FaZe. I felt like Twist would probably keep B short, and you would put NAF as the B rotator, but I think overall there is a hole that needs to be filled in two different ways in terms of who becomes the A rifler and who becomes the B rotator. And I would actually, I wouldn't mind seeing Naf be the B rotator. I felt like he did it at one point in his career also, but it was like maybe like like two or three iterations of Liquid ago. So it's been a while. But the thing is, because I think, for example, like the Grand Slam lineup, it might have been Stewie who was like B short, and if Twist just plays that, I think Naf was the. I think it might have been Naf that was the player that was like B rotator, but I can't say for certain. Either way, how about on a more like macro perspective here though? You're saying that there are two people that are coming in that are a little bit more passive, being one being Twist, one being Skulls. Do you think that Skulls can just take up all of these sort of Rainwaker positions that Rainwaker was not finding much success in? I mean, consistently we were seeing Rainwaker have detrimental performances to Liquid. Like legitimately, he was a hindrance to them. I think some people in the very beginning were saying, "Oh, okay, cool, he's doing his job." But then the more that I watched, the more I was saying, "Okay, actually, he is beneath average in these roles." So, do you think that Skulls is going to be a hindrance, or do you think he's going to be a boon to Liquid success?
So to start off my answer, I will say I think he can do it. And to give you context for this, back when Pain like really started popping up on people's radars at like the Blast TV America's RMR, that was with the incredibly powerful trio of him, Zevi, and Biguzera. And those three together were incredible. They were constantly putting 1.1, 1.2 ratings. But Big Azera, he was the IGL at the time, and he liked putting himself in active positions. Zevi was the opper, and he just had a really good feel for the game at that point. Um, and Skulls was still in those very like passive positions. Since then, he hasn't done so well, and and especially Payne has done very poorly since losing Zevi and Nekis and Hardzal. But I want to attribute it to this, is that Skulls plays these very passive roles, and you can see in his stats he still does put up a good rating, but he's not winning games. And
Mm,
I'm going to attribute that to his roles. When you're a passive player, when you perform well, that doesn't necessarily add to your to your team's like win rate as much as it would be if you're an opper or an entry fragger. You understand what I'm saying there?
mm-hmm.
So he he hasn't done much for Payne recently, but that's because his roles don't allow him to. Now, they still won't in Liquid, to be honest, if he does continue these passive roles, but he is still very good at them, despite Payne's recent performances.
Okay, okay. The idea was floated around at one point, and there was even an article talking about the fact that Queserado was targeted by Liquid. In this, that's not obviously going to happen. We've already gone past that. But
Yeah.
if it were to have happened, just give me like a percentage, or how much better do you think they would be if they actually were able to secure Queserado over Skulls?
So Queserado has way more NAF-like positions, like in terms of the hard lurks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think at one point in the year, I was just like enamored by his like play style. He was down to like 10% opening duels, which is incredible considering like only operas ever get down that low. But no, yeah, I think on a pure firepower level, he's the Brazilian Cold Zera. He's incredible. Percentage wise, that was your question. I'm gonna put it at like he's like a 30% firepower upgrade over Skulls.
Okay.
And I don't think that's because Skulls is bad, but I think Quesarado's just so good, and NAF has the ability to put to slot somewhere else, and Quesarado can continue playing the roles he likes.
Right, right. Okay. Just kind of floating that out there. I would probably put it at something like, yeah, I'd say I'd go a little, I'd just slightly lower than that. 30% seems like a huge, huge boost. And I think that
Yeah,
the fact that there's a little bit of role overlap might mean that you'd probably want to give Caserado all of his spots just to keep him really comfortable. But then I think because Naf has to switch, and Naf is probably one of the best people at switching ever. I've seen him switch from being one of the best rifler defenders on B
yeah,
Inferno to then switching to Pit, and he's still one of the best pit anchors in the world. Like, he's so versatile in any position where he just needs to stay pretty passive and just lock it down. So I wouldn't be super worried, but I'd probably say like personally 25%. That's the number that I came up with in my head when I asked the question. But again, like zooming out on the picture of Liquid with this proposed roster, Cadian joining it, to me, this is the first time in maybe maybe 4, 5 years actually, that Liquid are finally going to have a really active opera. Because if you think of just OC playing for them, Nitro playing for them as operas, it was generally speaking the riflers who were getting a lot of the resources to start off rounds. But do you think this is do you like how would you rate this overall now that Liquid are looking to secure an opera? I guess the deal is not like 100% officially done yet, but they're looking to secure an opera now that is going to definitely change the style of this team.
I'm a big fan. I like as I said earlier, like the best operas in the world are active. They can call around themselves, and I mean, KD not only calls around himself, he calls around the entire team. I think he's exceptional. I think his style of leading itself is just phenomenal. Um, I do have a few concerns about that if you want me to get into
Yeah, well,
that.
yeah.
But yeah, okay. So yeah, so just perhaps I want to say I think it's incredible that Cadian's joining this team. I've loved his play style ever since Heroic popped up on the world, like World Top 5 or whatever. My only concern is the voices in this team. Cadian's style like requires incredible trust. I mean, more so than any other in-game leader in the world. You have to know like he says stack 4B, you have to do it because that's just how he works. He has the read and you have to trust him. The question I have is Yakinder coming fresh off the IGL role. Like he's gonna want to call around himself still. And he's gonna want to have an input into the goings on in the team. Twists, um, he left Liquid because he wasn't having enough of a voice, like back in the day. So I'm not gonna guess that that's part of the reason why he's leaving FaZe, but it's clear that he wants to have a voice in the team. Naf too, like early on in the European roster, he said, "We brought in Rainwaker, and now that frees me up to be more active to choose what roles I want." That's a lot of voices,
Mm.
especially in a situation where Cadian needs to have the trust of the entire team. That's the only thing that concerns me a little bit, but I just hope that the other four players have as much trust in Cadian as I do.
Yeah, you bring up a really valid concern there that in Counter-Strike, especially at the highest level, so many players have so much self-trust that they want to have input in the team, especially seasoned veterans like we're seeing here with KD and Yakindar, Naf, and Twist. What's funny about that is Yakindar is going to probably be one of the loudest voices, but he's actually had the least time in Tier 1, well, second to Skulls, I suppose. Like the other three have so much more time in terms of just playing on huge stages consistently, winning big trophies. And if you actually look at it, like Yukinder is the one without really a trophy cabinet behind him, and the other three have some hardware that they can cite if there's a discussion that says, "Yo, Yukindar, like we've won before. You know, you've been close and you've been a great player, but if the decision comes down to that, the ring argument is going to come out in the locker room where they just have to say, "Yo, you need to pipe down, young blood." But I do like in general the fact that Cadian is going to bring a fresh look for the defense of Liquid, because so many times in the past and just for the last handful of years, it has just predicated itself on rifle setup, and now there's just a new element to the Liquid game where Cadian will call his own number. He's going to push himself forward in rounds, and he's going to look for opening picks. When I was competing at the ECL level in North America, I was actually downloading tons of Cadian demos, even when he was playing back on like Rogue and teams like that, just because he had such a strong knowledge, encyclopedic knowledge of potential plays, opportunities that you could find in a round, and he still does that today, or he's been doing that on Heroic for a long time. He's been trying to set himself up, and that it's just that there's so much rifle strength on this team that if you do set up Yakindar to go for an opening pick, if you set up Twist to go for an opening pick, that's probably going to net you a couple kills per half, but then now you just have this extra dimension, and that's just been something that's been so sorely lacking in Liquid for such a long time, and it's why people like OC have been under such scrutiny. But I also in some ways have found that I didn't even really blame OC, because I was in some ways like, I knew OC could be skillful. It's just that with the dynamics of the team, he never really had a big enough voice. Although they did say over time, yeah, he's talking more, like, he's calling his own number a little bit more, but you're still going to feel when you're next to Yakinder and at some points Elige that it should be them who's taking initiative, not yourself.
Yeah, he felt like he was, and I guess they always tried to break them out of this, but it always felt like he was stuck in the, hey, trade out your rifles role, and then, oh, when you're finally in the when you're finally in the clutch, that's when you can show off your flicks and such. I'm not saying they forced him upon this. I'm just saying this is how it felt like.
Yeah. Okay, let's pivot to CS2 in general. You wrote another great article earlier in mid-October about how CS2 changed, or has it really changed the way that pros should be playing the game. I think at this point we were looking at some of the data from, or we were looking at kind of at Sydney at this point, and so what were like the big conclusions of this article here, which are trying to outline like what's changing with CS2?
Yeah, so the data set for that was the Sydney qualifiers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's completely online for the record. Um, and I compared it to, I think, the IM Rio qualifiers, the one earlier this year, so just 6 months prior. Um, I wanted to mainly test two big things, which are people saying headshotting is easier. So players who have a high headshot percentage play style, like Bit and Twists, they're gonna do much better. And the other one I wanted to test was that oppers are going to have a tougher time because of the subtick issues, the changes to how the what you see is what you get sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I found with that is not really. Just comparing those two data sets, I found that headshot percentage has pretty much exactly the same correlation with rating, and same with opping. And actually, just before this, I crunched the numbers for City themselves. Um, So the and to preface my conclusion, the for headshot percentage, there's even less of a correlation between high headshot percentage and high rating. That's I want to say part of that is just due to people aren't used to subtick, especially on LAN. So it's going to be different spray mechanics that's going to cause more body shots. But in general, the conclusion is even at Sydney on LAN, headshot percentage does not mean you're a better player rating wise. And opping, I wanna give you a little pop quiz here, just a question.
Okay.
I compared Opper's rating at Sydney. and the 3 months of CS:GO, of their CS:GO play before Sydney. So not CS2, just 3 months of CS:GO play before Sydney and at Sydney. Can you guess what the difference was between rating on average?
Uh, it's tough because people like Brokey and Mondesi did really well. Shiro did really badly, and I don't really remember as well for some of the other players. I would probably I would probably say that they went down by like 0.04 or something on average for oppers.
The answer is zero. There
Okay.
is no difference. On average, there's no
Uh,
difference.
wow.
Uh,
Wow.
I
Okay.
mean, that's just the stats. Like clearly on eye test, we can see like it's more difficult to op,
Uh huh.
but because we see like with the subtic, like some shots that hit shouldn't, some shots that shouldn't do. Um, but but in general, the op is just as important as ever. It operas that are good in CS:GO, and that was this was like my final conclusion in that previous article. Operas that are good in CS:GO are gonna be good in CS2. The best players of CS2 are gonna be operas until, Donk becomes the best player in the world.
Okay. 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 I like that you took it to the numbers to figure that one out. I I think like okay. Do you think there's anything to? I guess people are saying yo in MR12 there's probably more rifle usage overall. Do you think that that's like it's like technically the gross number of ops is has shrunk and in terms of usage rate the weapon has gone down. So I also think though that that kind of posits the idea that if you are purely an op user and you need to and you really felt like you needed to have the gun for like 10 out of the 15 rounds per half, you might have a drop off in performance. And I think the player that you'd look most closely at is Shiro, who was obviously known for his passive op play, the fact that he's in a lot of ways when I would watch Hero games, it always felt like in some ways he's the opper that is most easily disturbed by utility. Like in late round situations, he's masterful in the clutch, but if you're talking about just like the process of a default and the steps through it, if you use really good utility, you'll probably get Shiro off of angles more than say like a Brokey or a Mondesi who are going to test utility a little bit more. So for people like Shiro and people that are generally speaking more passive operators. I'm trying to think of others like Jame, for example. You would do you think that there's anything to it where aggressive operators or more passive operators like it's going to shift into one direction or another?
So, in terms of just opping usage, I do want to shout out my boy Backpack Brain here. He runs a Substack and he looked at the ops at Sydney, and he calculated that there was like a well, let's see, I'm trying to see the exact number, like a 15% decline in op usage, which is pretty significant, which is what happens when you lose 3 gun rounds per half. But in terms of like playstyle, I do think that aggression is the name of the game right now. At least in the early CS2 meta, we see these Tech 9 rush rounds work way more than they should.
Yeah.
So I think aggression is the name of the game. Like someone like Mauisnake, who we know performed well at Sydney, very well at Sydney even, like his aggression is going to be spectacular and it's going to work super well from the mechanics of the op in
Hmm.
CS2.
It does feel like just about everything right now is leaning itself towards being more aggressive. Although I do think that that's something to do with like I, it's kind of hard to put my finger on it exactly, but it's kind of in a way why Anubis was so T-sided at the beginning. Well, maybe that's a bad
It's just
example actually.
discomfort. It's just
Yeah.
discomfort, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like people just aren't used to the game yet, and that's fine. You don't
Hmm.
expect it. But when you're not comfortable with the game, you can't fall back on your mechanics. You can't, you can't fall back on those default instincts. Like, oh, okay, they're rushing my site. I need to play this position. I need to hold this angle. I need to spray like this. It's just tougher to do that, and that's fine. It's gonna
Hmm.
fix itself over time, I hope.
So you think that for the first handful of months, aggression, quick Tech 9 rushes are going to be pretty hard to stop, but you would imagine in a year's time we're going to have a game that resembles more what CS:GO did?
I think yes and no. Like yes, because of the discomfort aspect, but also, of course, part of it is due to subtick. Like
Mm.
It's so hard to hold angles as we see.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I can't blame everything on just discomfort right now.
Okay, how about then like bigger general CS2 thoughts? Where with the state of the game? Well, you're okay. You mentioned subtick, so I guess like I'm sure a handful of people here or that are listening probably play at a a casual, maybe decent level, but from I guess everything you've watched or your experiences or anything like that, what does subtick feel like for you? Like, does how far behind 128 tick does it feel?
Um, I honestly I haven't played the game in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
I've been so like stuck with work and stuff. But personally, I don't feel it's too different. But I don't play on that high of a level.
Okay.
In terms of pro play, like we do see the difference. I mean, we see how many clips a day on Reddit.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Yeah, I would say like the when watching Sydney, like teams just getting mowed down by pistols and just people running at them and they're not able to transfer sprays and things. Like there were probably, in my opinion, like I could count on one hand the amount of top tier pros that had good sprays at Sydney, and I
yeah,
even watched players miss 4 or 5 bullets before they even landed their first one. That was really concerning, and I hope that, and I'm kind of hoping two things happen. One, people just practice way more, and so they get used to the new mechanics, and two, I actually do hope that over time Valve fixes subtick in a way where it does resemble CS:GO even more, because it's kind of like a sort of like a bitter pill that I've had to swallow for myself when I've been playing CS2, is that some of the mechanics are simply different. Like and it's just I don't know if it's ever going to change. And so in a way, like Simple's whole line about don't play the game for the first 3 months, because he's just praying that it feels more like CS:GO in 3 months time.
yeah. I do. I don't know what to say other than I hope so too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, okay. Well, we can move on from that one. Let's talk about a team again. Like, let's keep the NA focus on the fact that the runners up for this event don't seem to be shifting their roster around. So I would love to talk about FaZe, but I feel like this team is getting blown up in like 5 different directions. But while we're
yeah, I don't.
here,
I wish. I don't know what's happening there, bro.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know either, which is why it's like I don't want to like really harp on them or like continue with that. But like Complexity's form at Sydney was really cool, and it feels like we're finally seeing some of those fruits. Some of the fruits of labor pay off for Complexity, where this switch from Fang to Elige is actually paying off for them. So like, what for you with like the complexity the right now with complexity they're going into the fall finals. Like, how do you think that form that they showed at Sydney is going to move over to the next tournament?
Yeah. So I have actually quite a few thoughts on complexity, as you can imagine. I mean, I was yelling to my pillow at 4 a.m. watching them lose round after round on overtime on Ancient.
Yeah, yeah.
But but so in general, I'm gonna break down my thoughts into a few things. One, they're so damn good on Anubis. Oh my God, I love
Mm-hmm.
watching this team play Anubis. The way they play Anubis, I think, is just world class, maybe better than any other team, because their tactical aggression is so good, and like flashing out B main. Every team does that, but I think Complexity is particularly good at that. Elige is, at least at Sydney, he was so good at holding mid by himself, and on T side, just like playing mid by himself. It was incredible to watch him take Nico on one, things like that. It was so amazing to watch that. Elige's addition to the team is you can definitely see it on Anubis because mid is so important for that A rotate. Elige being such a strong player in mid and just being able to trust him to hold that position no matter what utility is thrown in his face, it allows Floppy to just hunker down on A site and really hold it. With Fang, he was struggling a lot in that role. And I think Elige's addition has been phenomenal in that respect. And we can see that not just on Anubis, but on the other maps too, where Elige plays an important rotation position. And it frees up the other anchors to just focus on their own site.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring up the hard evidence in terms of positions and how they're benefiting each other, because I'd say that the narrative has been Elige is instilling some sort of like veteran confidence, or that he's helping in terms of create the better protocols, which we kind of have to guess at. But the fact that their two positions were so interlinked, because Fang had a hard time at mid on Anubis. It was not really his forte. Felt like he would either just get pushed off of the angle so easily that, or he would just give up his life. And then you put your A anchor in Floppy in such a terrible position where he was either trying to help Fang, so he's kind of playing off the bomb site, and then teams were abusing that because they know that, oh, okay, there's two people towards middle, and then the A lurker just kind of lurks out onto A
Yeah.
and then catches Floppy as he's trying to rotate back into the bomb site, and it made Floppy look bad. It made him look like it's the one domino falls in Fang towards middle, but now that domino is a pillar in Elige, and they're just so much more stable on the map. So beyond that, the fact that they talked about with complexity that Elige was able to help shorthand a lot of comms for them so that they were able to just abridge all of the statements that they were making, that's a huge boost to them. But Elige himself, his individual form was so fun to watch at this. Like, you talk about what he was doing like mid on Anubis, but when he was taking mid on Ancient, for example, the way that he was able to just continually contest, even phase on that position, the way that he was able to fight, like so many like their Ancient has also gotten better too, because Elige has such great awareness of what he needs to accomplish when he's taking mid control for them, and he just values his life in a way that's a little bit better. Where I'm not trying to unfortunately, you kind of do have to do this one for one comparison where what did they have before with Fang and what did they have with Elige? And with
I mean,
Fang,
I just
yeah,
sorry, I wanted
yeah,
just to plug another one of my articles. I made a article for when they made that move, and I did the whole roles thing again, and it was practically one for one. I
yeah,
mean, it's incredible how many roles they overlapped on, and how Elite is just frankly better.
yeah, yeah. And so to see, yeah, like mid Ancient too. I mean, all of these spots are now just, you're getting a player that's, one, finding some more openers, and two, able to, if he's not, he's just staying alive longer, and that's, I mean, that just helps a team so much. And I'm glad to see that this is kind of actually having this outwardly like positive effect on practically everyone on the team. I would say the one guy that I feel like maybe hasn't felt this boost has probably been Halzerk to me. I feel like I'm just not necessarily like, my grade of his city performance was just kind of like average. And I asked this question to Yumi 2 episodes ago, and I really want to know your opinion on it. As like people with a strong NA bias, so many of us see that article that's saying OC is allowed to look for options now that Liquid are probably moving away from him, given that they're signing Cadian as their opper. And many NA people would love to see OC return to JT and Floppy, reuniting that extra salt trio. But based off of what we've seen lately, and really just your opinion, do you think it's worth it for complexity to drop Halzerk and bring on OC?
I don't think there's a world in that makes sense. Halzerk, okay, sure he's not putting up 130 ratings like Mauisnake, but you you picked up the best riflers in America for a reason, right? Like you have Floppy, Grim, and Elige on this team. Like those are supposed to be your star players. Let them. And Halzerk has that flash of aggressiveness that that we talked about earlier. OC was missing on Liquid. He is able to step into those positions, running down. I remember a lot of times on Anubis, for better or for worse, running on T side, running into canals and just taking the early fight to connector or whatever people call it with a Krieg. Like for better or for worse, he will do that, and he'll call himself around that. Maybe OC's better, like mechanically, but how much? 5, 10%? Like I don't think it's worth it once you put up a second place position at the first S tier CS2 event. Like doesn't make sense to me.
Totally agree. Have yeah, just to reiterate my thoughts on that, it does. I do think OC is marginally better than Halzerk, but not enough so that you would be willing to pay a buyout. And I also don't see the players on complexity necessarily wanting Holzerk out. I'm sure that they would love to play with OC again, like on a personal level, but they aren't mad that they're playing with Halzerk day in day out. So I think that's good enough for them. Unless like visa issues become a problem, because I remember that was a slight hindrance for them at one event where
Yeah.
Halzerk wasn't able to play it. But if that's not really going to be too big of a factor for them, then I would just imagine that they just stick with this 5-man lineup that they're running because it's netting them some decent results. Okay.
I I
Oh
I
yeah.
want to say like it's part of the issues with Halzerk is that when they play like Blast Showdown or like other LAN events, or sorry, other online events like a Junket qualifier or something, um, the issues with Halzerk on his ping, right? That should go away once they become if if they stay a staple top 10 team, because then they get the invites to these events and they don't have to deal with online CS. The ping issues don't really matter. And I do want to say a couple more things about complexity before we change the subject,
Okay.
if that's possible.
Yeah, yeah, go for it. Go
Because
for it.
um, I one thing is I want to credit this to Elige, but can't say for certain. Complexity are still losing, the complexity rounds where they lose to a force by that they never should, but they don't crumble after that anymore. That's the number one biggest change I've seen since adding Elige. And I don't know who's to credit for it. I want to credit Elige, but it's phenomenal. This is exactly what complexity need. Well, after, stopping to lose those complexity rounds. We saw it on Anubis versus G2. They lost against like a Mag 7 or something. But then they won the next round. With Fang, they lose that 100%, 13-11 or whatever it was. But Elige, I want to say it's his veteran attitude, allows them to stay together more. And I think that is like that was one of the biggest hindrances for complexity for finishing off leads that they had. And I'm so, so, so happy to see that fixed.
That's a good point. You would imagine that Elige would instill more accountability for everybody on the team because before the environment for complexity was that all of them were more or less at the same level and there's no power dynamic because of that where no one's really in a weird way no one's kind of the leader. Obviously JT is the in-game leader, but no one's the captain, but Elige is the de facto captain given the fact that he has 10 years on all of these players in a professional environment. And so if there's even though we've kind of talked about it before, like basically like it's been a running narrative for Elige in the past that like over time, like you see his nervousness. We see that he like bites his nails and there's like a he sometimes looks flustered or frustrated, but it's not like he's raging. That's a totally different concept than like for example, I will say at Sydney, for example, like even though before I would notice like Halzer would like pound the table and there would be like that feeling of frustration that would just linger after lost rounds like that. It does seem like you're saying that has more or less been taken care of, and I would imagine that the changing of that single person and just kind of having a more veteran force around them is probably doing that's probably a big reason for it.
Yeah. I just the fact that they stop like crumbling after those stupid losses, it's just such a relief.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about something that is also pretty much hot off the presses. The This was announced in a weird way that for the Blast Fall Finals, Vitality listed a 6-man substitute in Mezii, and now it looks more or less official that well, it is official. Mezii is leaving Fnatic. And I didn't see. I technically by the time of this podcast recording, I didn't see a Vitality announcement saying they've signed him. But I think that basically implies that they've signed him.
Yeah. I saw a fake Tina graphic. Those are always fun.
Oh, okay, so that means it's more or less official too. So so so
Profit.
yeah, so Mezii will be joining Vitality in the stead of Magisk, who it seems like at this point is also moving to Falcons, and this is a weird move for me. I have like a really hot take for this, so I kind of want you to go first because I don't want to characterize your take on this too much. So
Okay. So my take is that I love this move, honestly. Um, Maybe I've been talking with too many UKCS people, but um, but like Nero actually made this point yesterday, which is that there's not that many people who are good at Magisk's roles. like hard anchor CT side, and then like third man in flex type player T side. You can name like the people who are great at that on like one or two hands. You've got Naf, you've got Bit, you've got Hunter, Dicha. I love Dicha for this actually. That's why he's one of my favorite players. But the people who are good at that type of role are very few and far between. And I think Mezii has gone underappreciated for that far too long. I think he's very good at those roles. And on the other side of it, on the personality aspect, I think it's also an incredible fit because because of two reasons. One, with with Zonic and Lars gone and Dupree gone, there's no other Danes for Magisk to like be friends with on the roster. I'm right. I'm pretty sure that's
Hmm.
right. I'm not
Yeah,
forgetting
yeah, yeah,
anyone.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and we did an interview with Valenz a while back when he was trying to build that EU EG roster, and where he said that when you put together multiple nationalities, it's very important that everyone have someone of cultural similarity that they can talk to,
Mm,
that they can communicate with. Um, so you have Apex and Zywoo, and you have Spinks and Flames. Magisk has no one. Zywoo or Sonic is gone,
right,
and
right.
while Mezii, he never overlapped with Flames on endpoint, but he's closer to them than Magisk would be, and I think that's a very like underappreciated aspect of his addition.
Okay, okay. My hot take, and I think that it's because I've
Nah.
talked to so many British people for so long about Counter Strike, is that I see Mezzi, and I see a lot of people that are like really excited, like always. Okay, I'll just say it. To me, Mezzi has been the top three most overrated players for a
Oh
very
God.
long time in World Counter Strike. And I say this not to say that Mezzi is bad. I think Mezzi is a good, actually, and well above average player, but he is, to me, like so many people, it felt like when Dexter came into the team and Mezzi had to just go back to being a normal rifler, his rating didn't change at all. He was the same player before and after, and some people were very hyped about that move at the time, like, oh, Mezzi can finally show that he's a star. Well, this is what we've been getting from Fnatic, where if Mezzi is your best player on a team, you're the 15th best team in the world. And technically, you would kind of say like a few people should be fighting for him for like top player. Like it should have been Roy, it should have been Afro,
Could
it
have been Roy.
should have been Mezzi. Like all three of those guys should have been fighting for the best player. But to me, Mezzi has been the best player for Fnatic, and they've been the 15th best team in the world. And that's not to say that there were a lot of things that I would have changed about Fnatic. I for one have been pretty public about the fact that I don't think Dexter is like a great in-game leader,
Yeah.
and I think Mezzi in fact is a better in-game leader, better player. But whereas Magisk, on the other hand, is a top 20 player for me. Magisk, if I stop the year right now, Magisk would be like, I made my list actually pretty recently. I would have put Magisk somewhere between 17th and 19th as the best player or on the top 20 list. And so for Mezzi, I actually went through it myself also. Where would I put him and how far down would he be? He'd be like 35th right now in the world. And
Oh
that's
wow,
not,
you go all the way that? You go that far?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've just like went through all these players that I think are just better than him that didn't even make my top 20
Mm,
list, and he'd probably be 35th. And so that's a pretty big drop off for me, where he's still like, again, like I'm gonna say, I say this thing like he's one of the most overrated players in the world, but I still think he's good. Okay, like the way that I've heard so many people speak about him is that once he gets off the IGL role, once he's on whatever, it's like all these what ifs, and all of these things have at one point transpired, and yet he still hasn't really had a market improvement in his individual performance. He's still good, he's still playing a tough role and actually finding stats in it, and he's outputting in it, but this is to me a pretty big drop off. And now with the inconsistencies of Flames, the fact that Mezzi's just, he's good but not great like Magisk was, that and then like those two people, like you kind of had a little bit of a weak link on Vitality before with Dupree, although Dupree was able to ramp up his performance for the IEM Rio event
yeah.
and then the Blast Paris Major to win the major. I haven't really seen that kind of improvement from Flames that I would have wanted once he joined the team. And for me, if Mezii joins the team, he's a very self-sufficient player, and so I in a weird way, I don't think his his numbers are going to change that much once he joins this team. And I feel like we're now just seeing a bit of a firepower drop off as Vitality players get poached to Falcons, and that to me kind of lowers my stock in Vitality, despite the fact that they should have the best player in the world in ZywOo. I just think now that the supporting cast has weakened a bit, and whereas before I would have had Vitality as a lock to be a top 3 team, I would now put them more as like safely top 7, but I don't see them in the same sort of regular contention for trophies that I once did.
You really don't think ZywOo is gonna be like consistent quarter or semifinal team now?
I think that's possible. I think semifinal, quarterfinals is possible. Like that's like a top 7 team should be in that range for me. But I'm
That's fair,
saying
yeah.
like championship contention is the distinguishing factor here, where teams like Falcons themselves are probably going to be better. Teams like G2 are better. I mean, I have to see a couple. There's so many of these rosters that are changing so drastically that I don't really have a great beat on them just yet. But to me, if it's almost just like if they kept, if they were somehow able to hold on to Magisk, and even with Flames, I thought they were in championship contention, but now they've lost Dupree and Magisk. They've lost Zonic, and now they have to play with a new coach who I'm sure Xaz is still going to be a strong contributing member for them too. But it's it's like they went from an S tier team to an A tier team for me. So
Sure.
that's the difference.
One thing I do want to one thing that I didn't talk about earlier that I really like about this move is Apex has constantly harped on about that he needs his players to contribute more, to be aggressive in comms more, to call
Hmm.
for flashes, to he needs ZywOo to tell him, hey, I need someone to flash me in here. And Mezii, being a former IGL, is like one of the it can easily be one of those new voices. I think Magisk, I don't know how much Magisk did. I don't, I'm not tapped into Vitality's voice comms, but Mezii as a former IGL, I imagine could do better at that.
Hmm. I I would imagine Magisk was probably really good at it too. I would say it's to me like comms. I'd probably give it like a lateral change, and
Mm,
then firepower a slight downgrade. So
yeah.
to me, I do see it as a downgrade. I think I'll say this though, in a weird way, even though I just called Mezii one of the most overrated players in Tier 1 CS, I think this is really good for him because he was too good to be on Fnatic. So
That's true.
I would have wanted Mezii, and the way I also characterize a lot of players is that if they are for people that are not bona fide stars, like not including the ZywOos of the world and Monasees, etc., it's that if they're your 4th best player on your team or your 5th best player on your team, what is your team's aspirations and what is your team's ceiling? And for me, if Mezii is your 5th best player on your team, you can win championships. But the problem is I actually think Flames is now the 5th best player on your team, and now Mezii's your 4th best player. And then, I mean,
Bro, Apex?
by role, Apex is like a valuable player on this team. I'm
Okay,
speaking
okay.
like including role and what they're contributing. Like
Okay, yeah.
it's so well, but actually, yeah, you factor that in too, and it's like if you actually just want to do pure statistical output, Apex is going to be your lowest contributor, then Flames, then Mezii, and now you have 2 really heavy hitters in Spinks and ZywOo, and those to me are 2 guys that are top 7 in the world this year. They've both been fantastic. And if you have 2 players that are top 7 in the world, you should be contending. But I just also think that the floor of Flames, Mezii, Apex as a trio right there is actually kind of so low that it just brings them down too much sometimes. And so
Bro
that
is hating on
yeah.
endpoint graduates, bro. I think you're vastly like underestimating what Flames and Mezii can bring to the roster, to be honest. I don't I yes, Spinks and Zai take up most of the space, but I don't think that means that that Flames is going to be a detriment. He's been on this team for how long? What, like just a few months? I think it's very possible that he becomes one of the higher contributing members over time.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that in a weird way, my doubt, even though that we've been focusing on Mezii, my doubts still remain the most with Flames. I at the time rated the move well because I thought it was just simple 1-for-1, Dupree out, Flames in. You're gonna build up a player around in a really good structure and system that's already fit together, and you're just gonna have a guy that's probably more motivated. He's I'd say mechanically wise, I'd say Flames was sharper than Dupree at the time when it happened, and but but the way I graded that move was with Magisk and Zonic still on the team, and now you're shifting all these pieces around him. And even though they were able to win one trophy already with Flames, I in a weird way, it's like he just still doesn't instill me with veteran confidence, and I almost feel like now your veteran savvy and confidence is like Zywoo, Apex, and I guess like Spinks. Like
It's not Spinks and it's
it's
barely Zywoo.
yeah, right. So mentality and composure for this team doesn't seem nearly as solid or like as when Dupree and Magisk were on it, where it didn't matter the deficit. It didn't, and if they're ahead, they're not going to choke it. That's how Vitality always read before. But now I couldn't. We're gonna see some heartbreak moments with Vitality with this lineup where things just kind of get out of control and they spiral in a weird game. I imagine that'll happen.
I do want to add a little caveat here, which is even if Vitality do get worse, and I don't think you say they will. I'm not too sure about that. I think they'll get better, but or not better. Magisk is the best in his role, but I don't. I think it's like a decent move. Even if they get worse, other teams are getting way worse right now.
Mm, okay.
Like if G2 lose, Nico and Monesi, they're in the dirt. Who do you have to build around, bro? If Ents lose Snappy, you're done. These are players who, outside of Snappy, were not the best, who were barely in tier one. You know, if who else is there? Heroic losing Katie, and they don't know what they're doing. They have no IGL now. So like, even if Vitality do get worse, other teams around them will definitely get worse.
Actually, okay, that is actually a point I didn't consider as much. I guess in isolation, in a vacuum, I
In
would say
isolation, yeah.
in isolation in a vacuum, Vitality is worse. But with the surrounding competition being plucked apart for Liquid getting Cadian, for Heroic kind of dissolving in a weird way, like, and for G2 getting plucked apart also, and Ensk potentially getting picked apart, and FaZe vanishing off the face of the earth. There's so many things that have gone so badly for other teams that actually, in in complete context, this is good.
Yeah.
They lose one guy that's really good, but they're replacing him with a decent replacement. Not like like again, I'm not. I'd say overall this is bad for Vitality, but if you compare to everybody else, they're not out for much worse. Whereas everybody else is just like just limping at this point. They're just
The
like they've been.
shiniest turd.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, another team we just mentioned, Heroic. They have finalized their roster for the fall finals. Does seem like this is just kind of a one-off for them, where they're just playing with a lineup that we likely won't see for the future. But as it stands, it'll be Cadian and Zyphon slotting in with their people that were already more or less guaranteed for the rest of the year, which were Dupree, Shush, and Tessis. This is kind of the last dance for Heroic. But what do you make of this roster, or do you have any? Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Um, I think if this is the Sorry, no. What I wanted to say first is I think AZS said this about like Heroic getting Dupree a while back, and I thought it was just a funny dichotomy, which is the player who knows nothing except how to win joins the team who knows nothing except how to lose.
Good line. That's a good line.
Yeah. Um, Generally, I think, yeah, with Dupree joining the team, but with Cadian, it's a one-off. Like it'll be fun. I hope they make. I hope they play in the stage. I hope they get to face Astralis. That'll be fun. Does Zyphon join this team long term? I looked at the roles. He fits into Jabby kinda well, but with Cadian's system, like Jabby's roles are all
Hmm.
roles are kind of fluid in that situation.
Yeah, they meld together.
Yeah. Um, I realistically don't care who Heroic get. They're gonna in my eyes, in my mind, who rates Cadian as the best IGL in the world, one of the at least, but definitely the most innovative. I don't think anyone can get the same output from you know Tessus down Jabby. They want to bring back the riflers is what they said. I don't know what's gonna happen, but whoever the constellation of the other players are gonna be, I don't think any IGL is gonna be able to get the same out of them as Cadian did.
Okay, that's a good take because I would more or less say the same thing, that with Cadian out on this is just, I mean, when Heroic decided that they want to part ways with Cadian as opposed to Yabby and Stown, that was just the first bad move in now what is seemingly being a cascading effect of bad decision leading to bad breakup to now floundering for whatever you can find on the ground. And
Yeah.
Zyphon's been a player that has been hyped up regularly in the Danish scene as somebody that's probably the best Danish player that's not on a tier 1 team at this point. So it'll be cool to see him have this opportunity. I like that you bring up the roles, because even though, the team can be very fluid with Cadian at the helm, I do think that if you actually do slot in Dupree to Stown's roles, Zyphon to Yabby's positions, leave Cadian, Tessa's Shush where they were, at least you have a semblance of structure already going into it, and then you only really have to work with those two missing pieces. Dupree is a bit of a downgrade for Stown in group stage games, but actually Dupree has been pretty good online lately for Heroic in the Thunder Pick Cup, so that's... I don't know what to take of that. I feel like he's maybe having a little bit of a resurgence, but a big thing right now that actually with Dupree doing very well online, I actually think that Dupree is very pragmatic. Where Dupree knew that his spot was so safe on Heroic for such a long, or not Heroic, on Vitality for such a long time, that he did start to relax a bit. That he knew what it took to get into championship form, so he ramped himself up for 2 consecutive tournaments. And Vitality read that as he's probably going to just turn it off for a while again and so that's why they brought on Flames. But right now, Dupree's future is so uncertain that he actually looks like he's played himself into really strong form again and realizes, I need a contract. I need a guaranteed contract for 2 to 4 years right now so that I can relax again. And actually, in a weird way, this team kind of becomes dark horsey for me, because I also think that now that Cadian knows he's going to be playing the fall finals, which is in like 2.5 weeks from now, they're gonna get in surprisingly strong shape, and there's not gonna be any footage to go off of for this team, and that's when a team can be really scary and make a weird top 4 finish, top 2 finish at a tournament like this, where they don't have the cohesion always to actually win a championship, but they can really be such an annoying spoiler, and I think that's what they're gonna play at this event.
I mean, there's just so many things in their favor. It's actually just kind of funny. Just like, this is the last dance. Cadian's freaking gone after this. This is the Royal Arena. They're gonna try their hearts out to win the whole thing. It's it's quite a strange lineup, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of things in their favor, especially with everyone else being like a super new team, bar complexity. I do wanna wonder. I don't know if you know anything about if you watched too many of their games. So what did you think of Crizin and Sarah?
I didn't really check them out that closely to see. I watched like a map of when I was mostly focusing on Dupree. I went back and watched like
Mm.
the Vertigo game they played recently, where Dupree dropped like 100 something ADR, but I was just focusing on his play because I didn't think that Crizin and Syrah were in the future of this team, so I kind of just tuned anything that wasn't Dupree out. I just wanted to see what Dupree was doing well, and it's just like, okay, he was taking A ramp very effectively, and I could talk about him, but simply put, I didn't care about them because I just thought
That's
they were
fair.
out of this. Yeah. Did you have
Yeah.
opinions of them?
Well, Crizin is was IGLing for Mal's NXT. I want to say he's IGLing on this roster, but who knows at this point.
Hmm.
He did very poorly statistically speaking, but it's an IGL. It's so hard to analyze him, especially in just the few amounts of games that they had. Um, Sarah, he's actually, I don't even know if I have anything for him. I just wanted to say, like, if they need an IGL right after Cadian's gone,
Hmm.
maybe this is like them tipping their cap towards Crizin, saying like, "Hey, here's our next.
Mm.
We want this is essentially like a trial for you. Are you going to be the Cadian replacement?"
Okay, okay. Okay, that's a fun way to look into this. I don't think many people I didn't really read too much into these pickups or anything like that. I thought they were just really last second trial things where they just looked at
Probably. I mean, yeah,
Danish talent. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, okay. There's one more move I wanted to talk about here. I'm going to look at the news at the very end of like when we're talking about this one to see if anything popped up in the last like hour. But the last thing that has really happened for a tier 1 team or a partnered team at the very least is that Hampus had been removed and Alex from Movistar Riders has joined the team. So This is obviously a slightly weird move because Alex has been playing with Movistar for practically his entire career in the tier one space. But yeah, what do you think about the fact that they're going with Alex?
Um, my main thesis on this move is I hope Threat knows what he's doing.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I I've always rated Hampus, probably overrated him in my opinion, just because I liked his play style. Um, but I hope that Alex is a comp comp comparable IGL at this higher level. We know that he can bring like unknown talents like Senpaius really into the field. Maybe he can unlock head trick in a way that Hampus and Alexi couldn't. But I listened to some interviews. His English is fine. Like he'll do good in comms regard. And the and I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but the role issues definitely help a lot with Alex joining.
yeah. I think most people like the main thought that you would probably first have is that he's always played with Movistar. They've always spoken Spanish, but I've talked to Alex before in person, not only on desks but like just kind of after games too and things like that. And he can carry himself rather well. And I mean, I would say probably Hampus could call a little bit smoother in English, but Threat was talking about for a while before this move, I think like a week before, in an NIP produced segment on their Twitch channel that
Pajama party, they called it.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. That they were looking for someone to like really be a more solid leader, which is a weird take for me because Hampus was their in-game leader for so long and they actually achieved fairly decent results. I think they probably peaked at like top 7 in the world at some point with Hampus at the helm of the team. And so it's not like you couldn't win with Hampus calling for the team, but they just for some reason maybe visions clashed. And the thing is that like Hampus came out in that interview after the fact saying that the headline was that there were some players who did not respect my voice on the server. And I I don't know what it is, but it just feels like why are IGLs having such a hard time with config? Like like that just seems to be a factor here where it's like he obviously wants space, but are we really trusting config right now more than we're trusting like Hampus or Alexi B? Because that's kind of, it seems like the direction that NIP have chosen consecutively twice now.
Yeah.
And it's not that config has proven himself to be a top 30 player in the world anymore. Like he's super inconsistent, really streaky, and oftentimes just like like the communication between him and other players on his team doesn't always look really well ironed out. And so if it is about config, who I'm making a strong assumption about, but it does seem like people have a hard time working with him. I do question some of the GMing that's going on with NIP. I yeah. Yeah, I just like, who would you take? Would you take Config or Hampus? If you had to pick, like start a team today, who would you get?
I mean, I told you I was biased. Hampus.
I would take Hampus too though. I would take him in
Yeah.
a heartbeat over Config. That's like no question. You have like a solid entry fragger in Config, but I've also seen Hampus go for a lot of entry type roles too
He
when he
loved it.
needs it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and he can call, and he can even be a secondary caller. Like there's so much versatility. He seems more flexible too. I looked at some of the roles for Alex though, and some of the positions for me are, I think they're okay. I don't think they're perfect. Like for example, I think like he's so a few that I looked at, like he's the outside rifler on Nuke for CT side. He's a B rotator on Overpass, which I think is fine. And then he's like an A rifler, kind of a rotator a lot of the time on Inferno A also. And I think that like one thing that to me like this move is a little bit weird because they brought on Esatag and they brought on Alex at the same time for Hampus and Brolin. And I actually do think this does help out the role issue slightly because we know Esatag can be a glue guy where he can just play whatever position is needed of him, even taking up the op at one point. Thankfully, he's not going to have to do that here. But with Alex, he does seem to want to be in a more active position, which I don't think is terrible, but I'm not sure about it because it's simply the fact that Alex's fragging can be okay in random tournaments here and there, but Alex was never a show stealer for me for Movistar Riders, where like like I remember specifically one tournament in 2022 where before Cologne, I think it was DreamHack or not DreamHack. It was ESL Challenger. It was something in Spain. It was something in Spain, and Alex was actually the unofficial MVP of that event. It doesn't get an HLTV MVP because it's like a $100,000 tournament or whatever, but he was like the MVP of this tournament over Sun Pius, playing very active roles. But after that tournament, I really never saw him pop off like that again. Like people like Mopaz would sometimes be good. I mean, there was obviously we remember Sun Pius at Cologne itself, and for so I guess my concern summed up is just like I don't know if Alex is playing these positions at a level where it's going to actually boost NIP to become like a top 8 team again. I don't think they're going to reach that point because their ceiling is very capped when Alex is one of your players because
Right.
he needs active positions and he's not like world class at them.
Well, Hampus also really liked active positions, to be fair.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I think I'm assuming here that Alex is gonna hop into more of a supportive role as time goes on. Um, you can compare him to other passive IGLs do have a spot in the meta. Like they're not completely gone. Like, you know,
Yeah.
but I think he could definitely slot into that. One thing I thought was funny is we saw in the Hampus interview, he said like, you know, we have 4 players who want to play bath want to play Bathrooms
Yeah.
on A. Like,
Yes, yes.
yeah. Also, that's you, bro. Like you're the IGL and you want to play that.
Yeah.
Like you it's obviously it's problems with the rest of the team, but you also can't be commanding all these incredible spots when you have, in theory, the best of Swedish CS on your team.
Let's do hard preds on this team. Within the next by the end of February, that's too long. By the end of January, what do you think the highest ranking position NIP will find on the top on HLTV's ranking will be?
So what events do they have? They have fall final, right? And they have,
Are they in the fall final?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I don't think they're getting past 12. I I still don't like. I understand Threat now has his vision. I still don't like all this throwing random players at the wall. For God's sake, someone go back to a Swedish lineup, please. I can't deal with this. Like, we need more national lineups. How are Fnatic and NIP both international? Please. Okay,
That's
actually,
okay.
there's a point.
Let's do like a Swedish draft right now because there is a world that you could just put together a good Swedish lineup right now. We know we have Brolin, we know we have Hampus. There are other people out there that are kind of
Okay,
like scattered on different teams.
yeah. This was so actually, in that Hampus interview, it was taken from a Dust to Sweden interview.
Yes. Yeah.
They didn't include this in the HLTV part, but the last question was like, "Hey, do you think you'll go to international or Swedish?" And he said, he said probably international, but I think there's room for a Swedish lineup,
Yes.
especially now with Isaac. I think Isaac is such a good shout if
Yeah.
they can afford it.
My take a couple months ago when I wanted Brolin to start speaking Swedish again also was to if NIP were able to get Isaac and get Knock and they would drop Headtrick and Config, then I was actually a big fan of that kind of team. Technically speaking, Esatag can speak Swedish. I think he did that for a while when Device was on NIP before. Or no. Or wasn't there a period where I don't know. I thought Esatag could he speak Swedish? No. It was just Device that could speak Swedish. My bad.
Yeah,
I don't think
but
Esatag could.
I don't know, to be honest. But didn't Device say like it was pretty close anyways?
Yeah, yeah. I don't. I mean, every time I hear Europeans talk about languages and things like that, they're like, "Oh, we're neighboring countries." Yeah, you actually learned that language in fourth grade or something weird like that.
Yeah.
It's always European education is always so much ahead. They're like, "Oh yeah, it was mandatory for us to learn this just so we could speak to our neighbors." But the Hampus like. This lineup now really, I mean, it's not going to happen on NIP because Nock has already been vocal about not wanting to work with NIP again. But if there were
Dude,
a
yeah, no
lineup
doubt.
with Nock, Isaac, Hampus, Brolin, and then you'd have to like steal Rez.
You can't take res.
No, he wouldn't leave. I don't think he'd leave NIP, but if that were possible, I actually think that that team is better than this new NIP lineup. I don't know who you would
Have
get if
three
it's
active players in Hampus, Res, and Brolin. I guess Rez is more lurky T side, but like you're splitting too many active positions, I think. You need someone to be more passive. You need to force someone to be more passive.
I think Rez could be more passive than Brolin and Hampus. So I'd be willing to say that. Like he can, if you actually really wanted to get somebody that seems to have gone over a big role shift over his career, it's Crims. Like Crims is probably the like a, in terms of
Yeah,
Fnatic, he's been
get Crimson here. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah,
You've done you have four players who've done nothing but lose for the past 4 years. Get someone who knows how to win.
yeah, exactly. And if this just happened on Fnatic, now that they're losing Mezii, if they just do a big pivot, oh, that would be so crazy. Actually, oh, actually, now I'm getting excited for a lineup that I know is just never gonna happen. But
Yeah.
yeah, it would be cool.
God, I wish.
Hmm.
We need more national teams. You know, I like teams that are national because you know it's the best that they can do. You have set expectations. When you go international, the expectation is to compete at the very top.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Big, big. I'm happy when they make playoffs because these are the best German players around.
Yep.
You're not going to get better than this. And it's so tough because then you have teams like OG, Into the Breach, Fnatic, NIP, who all go international for the idea of of being one of the top, and you're
yeah.
not
No,
because there's
yeah,
not
no.
that many good players. There just aren't.
Right, right. Hmm. Okay, I think that brings us to though a conclusion for this one. I want to give you an opportunity to plug everything you're working on or how people could find you. So, what's the best way to find more Scoopster?
Find more Scoopster, Twitter at Scoopster CS. Once
Okay,
Elon finally finds implements me to buy the inactive at Scoopster, then I'll get that. But until then, it's at Scoopster CS.
okay, and you can obviously see Scoopster's work occasionally posted on dust2.us. That is really, honestly, I'd say like your work lately on Dust2US is a big reason that I wanted to contact you and make sure that
Oh,
I gave you a bit of a shout out because I mean, you're putting in the legwork. You're showing all these positions that people are playing. You're talking about hypotheticals for if they were to play together in terms of aggressive and passive. And I do think that those kind of articles probably are in a position right now. They're starting to gain some favor. I think people are starting to like come over. I think that this space is actually being very receptive to that. But I just wish there were more people putting their eyes on it. And so yeah, keep on with that kind of work because it's very valuable. Also, it makes my job easier because I'm going to trust what you say in those things, and then I don't have to do all the legwork myself sometimes when it's like, okay, what position did that guy play? Oh wait, Scoopster wrote an article about it. I'm aware of all the positions he plays on every single map, CT and T side. So thank you again, Scoopster, so much. And for everybody else that's watching, be sure to check him out. All of his links are in the description below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't to the YouTube channel. And that's going to be it for another episode. So thanks, everybody.